Hello, my name is George and this is my sample lesson in English literature, and today we will be covering the use of poetic metre in Thomas Hardy's poem The Voice. And this is a really fantastic poem to look at from this angle because there's a lot of interesting stuff done by Hardy with metre in this poem, and it's a great resource to show how metre can be used alongside things like language and themes to create some real strong effects in a poem. And before anything else, it's probably actually a good idea to go over what metre is to begin with. And there's a simple answer to that, and there's a more complicated one. But the very simplest definition of metre is as rhythm in poetry. So all poetry has a certain way in which it is spoken, and that is to do with the number of syllables and the stress pattern on each of those syllables in a line, or in a sentence, but in poetry it's called a line. And there's a stress pattern in human speech, even outside of poetry. Every language has its own way of dealing with stress, but in English there's a certain stress pattern. So, for instance, this first word here of the poem, woman, that has a stressed syllable followed by an unstressed syllable, and these are the default ways of noting, the default notation of stressed and unstressed in metre, with stressed and unstressed, and you can remember unstressed because it looks like a U. So woman goes dun dun. It has this rhythm of a stressed syllable and an unstressed syllable. And the rhythm employed in this poem here is Dactylic Tetrameter, and that's an extremely complicated way of saying that each line of the poem has 4 dactyls, and a dactyl is simply a stressed syllable followed by 2 unstressed syllables. And one of these is called a foot, and a dactylic tetrameter is simply 4 of these in a line. And it's as simple as that. That's what it means. Tetra means 4, and dactyl simply means one of these stressed syllables followed by 2 unstressed syllables. So if we look at this first line, woman much missed how you call to me, we can see that. Woman much missed how you call to me, And besides, this is a good way of showing you how metre works in a technical sense. But besides that, let's think about the effect that this creates. As we can see here, there's a number of things going on here. There's the alliteration of M in these first 3 words here, and there's the repetition of call to me. The prevailing effect which arises from this first stanza, and even from this first line, is one of sadness and ennui and unease, I think it's fair to say, and sort of wistfulness. And Hardy was not the happiest chap, as you may be aware. And in this first line here, not only is that effect created through the language employed and through the repetitions and so forth and the alliterations, it's reinforced by the metre. Woman much missed how you call to me. There's a plodding and circular manner to the way in which these words are spoken, which would not have the same effect if it was otherwise. Dactylic tetrameter is actually not the most natural way for English poetry to be spoken. A far more natural way is what we have here, which is favoured by Shakespeare, the Iambic Pentameter, and I'm sure you will have encountered that if you've ever studied Shakespeare. So this, from the sonnets, is in Iambic Pentameter. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. And you can sort of feel that's a much sunnier tone that emerges not just from the subject matter and the words employed here, but also from the rhythm, from the prosody, it's called, another technical term, but from the metre employed. And so we can see from these 2 examples how the use of the different metre creates an entirely different sense to the spoken word of a poem. And if we continue on to the next line, I think it's actually worth reading this whole first stanza to give you a better idea of the effect. So, woman much missed how you call to me, saying that now you are not as you were. when you had changed from the one who was all to me, but as at first, when our day was fair. And it's quite a confusing, the timeline is somewhat confusing here, but essentially this poem is directed to Thomas Hardy's deceased first wife, Emma, whom they had become estranged, and they did separate, and he's essentially saying that now she is dead and she is much missed, and he's sort of returned to her memory. She is not as she was, as you were. She is as she was at first, when their day was fair. And so this is again reinforced by what he does with the meter. Rather than simply resuming the tetrameter of the first line, he breaks it, saying that now you are not as you were. The final dactyl is incomplete. We do not have these two unstressed syllables. We simply have a stressed one. It ends emphasizing this word were. And the same thing happens, although slightly differently, on this fourth line. In fact, the third dactyl is broken. It's day was, instead of our day was de, or something. There's only one unstressed syllable. And so, again, you have this drawing attention to these two words, fair and were. And these are probably the essential words to the sense of the first stanza, because she's not, as it were, with this very sort of mournful word were, emphasized by the lone stress and the long vowel quality. The same thing happening with fair. You have this same sound quality from these two words, and they rhyme, although they're only a half rhyme. But you also have this reinforced by the meter, where they are both emphasized by breaks in the meter. You might ask, what is the point in even using this dactylic tetrameter if Hardy's just going to break it? And you might say he just doesn't know what he's doing, but I prefer to think that he instead meant especially to call one's attention to the breakages, to the disruptions in the meter. Once it's established, he reinforces the theme of change, which runs all throughout this first stanza. Were and fair, these contrasts. He reinforces the contrast and the sense of change, of transformation, with a transformation in meter. So again, you can see how there's this synchronicity and this twinning of the themes of the poem and the language employed with the meter. And there are further breakages all throughout the poem. The fourth line of the second stanza, I don't have that much time, but I'll just call to attention a couple more examples. The fourth line here of the second stanza, even to the original air blue gown, is nothing to do with tetrameter at all. It's giddy and excited because of this jumble of stresses, even to the original air blue gown. It's hard to even say what the stress pattern there is, because it's irregular, and that calls to attention the giddiness of the narrator in thinking in this more sort of positive second stanza about when their day was fair, when him and this woman were happy together. And he reinforces the sense of giddiness and excitement that the narrator feels through the use of meter. And again, there are several other examples of the breakdown of meter throughout this poem, but essentially what has happened here, to summarize, is that after establishing a very sluggish rhythm to his language in the first line, he then he creatively breaks from his own established parameters in the poem to convey certain feelings which are also conveyed in the language. So I hope this has been of use in helping you to see the ways in which meter can be employed alongside the linguistic aspects of a poem in order to create atmosphere and reinforce certain themes. And I hope it has shown you that rather than being, a kind of stodgy requirement of poems or a technicality away from the more exciting end of the language, that meter is actually a wonderful device for exploring the different ways in which human language can convey certain things without just saying them. So yeah, I hope this has been helpful, and it's been my absolute pleasure giving this lesson. And Goodbye.